Welcome back to the Everyday Apologist. I'm Kevin Robert Jarvis. This channel is based on my book, From One Father to Another, What Becoming a Father Taught Me About God. Link below to the book if you're interested. And if you like what you hear, subscribe to the channel so you kind of get the notifications for the upcoming videos. Today's chapter is going to be, the question is going to be, does God give us what we want? And another way, just kind of where that is God enough to satisfy us? So this question came about it was about two Christmases ago. I was sitting down here actually and just kind of reading a book, and it was about 2 days after Christmas. And my kids were, all playing around, doing their thing, playing with their new gifts. And then my daughter comes up to me and she says, "Dad, I'm bored." And I was like, "Okay." And then my little son comes over to me, he's like, "Dad, I'm bored too." Wow. And then my oldest son, he was kind of off doing his old thing, and he gave me the impression he was bored too. And I was kind of like, didn't we just have Christmas where you guys asked for all of these things that you now have, and how much you really wanted them and you thought they're going to bring you so much joy? Are you really bored of those things already? And they're kind of like, yeah, a little. And my daughter at the time actually said, Dad, instead of that karaoke machine that I got, I really wish I would have asked for a hoverboard like Owen got. I remember just thinking like, okay, well, I don't know what to do for you now. You asked for these things, you got them. You're bored. It's just the way it works sometimes. But what I did do is I said, you know what? Do you want to play with me? I'll get down on the floor. I mean, we got down on the floor. I played with Luke with his blocks for a while. I played with Kara, one of the new board games she got. I played some video games with Owen, and I just basically spent time with him. And I think uh, a couple things struck me about that. The first was how much I'm like my children. And I'd be willing to bet how much like some of you are like my children in that situation. I can think of so many times in my life where I said to God, if I just had this. At one time, it was, I just really want to meet the person I'm going to spend my life with. And once I had that, it was, well, I really want a house and I want a car and I want a great job and I want children. And it always seemed like there was always something more. And if I had to be totally truthful with myself, not that my children don't make me happy or bring me joy, or my wife doesn't bring me joy, because they do, but there was always still some emptiness there, still something missing. Every time I got these things or achieved something, I'd still feel this sense of there's got to be something else. And that Christmas, that couple days after Christmas, reminded me of that. And I'd be willing to bet that some of you maybe have experienced the same thing. You can think of the times maybe you've got the dream job that you always went after, or you're in the marriage, you found the person you're going to spend your life with, or you have the success you've been seeking, and yet you still find sometimes there's an emptiness there, and there's something lacking and you can't really figure it out. And so I think it, quite honestly, I realized I'm really not that far off. None of us are really far off from what my children were doing. They had all these things they wanted and desired, and yet they still wanted more. And I think that the way I offered my presents to my children, I realized they were bored and they kind of just wanted more, more things. They were dissatisfied with the things they had at that moment. I realized that all I could offer them at that point was my presence. And I believe God does the same thing. I believe God sees us all and says, you want all of these things and you keep thinking that they're going to bring you happiness. They're going to bring you ultimate joy. And they might bring you a fleeting happiness and a fleeting joy, but it eventually, that novelty wears off. And you come back to this baseline where there's some discontent and some angst there. And I believe that's when God says, he offers us his presence. And he says, if you really want what's going to give you that peace, it's going to be me. I just want to add in here. I have a couple notes here because I don't want to miss anything. So the question then becomes is does God give us what he wants? Or does God give us what we want? And I believe if you're willing to say that what he gives us is himself, then yes, he does. But like my children sometimes, I offer them my presence, say, hey, let's go for a bike ride. Let's go do something together. And they still kind of go, I don't really want to do that. And they go do their own thing. And I believe that's what we do to God every day. God says, I'm here. You can enjoy the time with me. And we kind of go, yeah, but I'd rather go do this right now. So C.S. Lewis once said that history is just one long story of people trying to find happiness apart from God. And yet it seems, if we look back on history, people don't really find it in this world. So it seems like St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until we find rest in you. And I think that's the truth. I think when I look back at my own life, that I've always been searching for something apart from God. I've always been looking for the next thing that's going to make me happy and bring me joy. And truthfully, I think a part of me really wants there to be something apart from God that will bring me this complete joy and happiness. But I believe it just doesn't exist. And people who argue that point say that it does. I mean, I look around in our world and I think to myself, prove it, because there's a lot of unhappy, from celebrities to the common person, that have some people have everything they've ever wanted, and yet they're still unhappy. They end up in rehab, or they end up destroying their lives. So the evidence doesn't point to the fact that the things of this world bring us peace. And so, I think of my own kids sometimes. If I gave them the choice every night at dinner and said, what do you want for dinner? They'd probably choose like ice cream and cookies. And yet on their plates, they end up with like meat, potatoes, and vegetables. And so I give my kids what they need, not only what they want. And I believe God does the same thing. God is saying to us, just like we know as parents, I know sometimes when my kids are asking for certain things, I know that ultimately it won't bring them happiness. Doesn't mean I don't give them things, and it doesn't mean that God doesn't give us things. But I think, like any good parent, we also know that there's a line there that can't be crossed. We can give them certain things, but we know that it ultimately isn't going to make them happy. What is going to make them happy is relationship. We know that a loving relationship between our children is going to bring them more happiness than anything or things in this world. And so I believe, like we do as parents, we balance between giving them enough things and giving them ourselves. God's doing the same thing. God gives us things. He plays chess in our life, I believe, and puts certain people in our lives, and maybe pushes us along to certain opportunities, because he knows those things can bring some happiness in this world. But ultimately, I believe he knows that a relationship with him is what is going to bring the most happiness. So I want to read the discussion questions here. Number 1, think of the last time you were bored. Can you identify what you thought was missing that would fix the problem, and did it? Number 2, do you feel God's presence in your life? Why or why not? Pretty straightforward. Number 3, is God's presence enough for you, or do you still feel like something is missing? That's something I had to be really honest with myself. There are still things in my own heart that I believe are going to make me ultimately happy apart from God. Is there something for you too? Does the moving goalpost or the "I'll be happy when" syndrome ring a bell for you? So the moving goal line, it's always, I've had that mostly all my life, is "I'll be happy when." And pretty much every time I get there, there's always another "I'll be happy when." Number 5, do you feel that spending time with God could fulfill your desires? Why or why not? So that's the chapter today. Hopefully you'll, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, subscribe below. And thank you for joining me. See you soon.